Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Johnson of Louisiana, page 6, line 2, strike and.
The amendment shall be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Time and again, during debate in this Judiciary Committee, many of our Democrat colleagues have said on record that they do not believe criminals should be eligible for green cards. We certainly agree. However, as we've been pointing out here this morning, this bill text does not ensure that. Under the current text, an alien convicted of a DUI can still get amnesty. My Democrat colleagues may try to say that DUIs could be considered crimes involving moral turpitude, quote unquote, and that then would make them make that alien ineligible. But the truth of the matter is, the bill's text allows that ground of inadmissibility to be waived, and that's our continuing problem here. The bill denies eligibility for an alien who has been convicted of 3 or more offenses where the convictions were on different dates and the alien was imprisoned for collectively 90 days or more. Thus, an alien can be convicted of multiple DUI offenses and still be eligible for amnesty under this reconciliation bill. My amendment ensures that aliens do not receive amnesty if they've been convicted of driving under the influence even just once. I know we all agree that drunk driving is an extremely dangerous crime that kills thousands of people in the United States every year and injures hundreds of thousands. According to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the average drunk driver has driven under the influence over 80 times before their first arrest for DUI. Such dangerous conduct should not be rewarded with amnesty. This amendment makes clear that individuals who have been convicted of a DUI are ineligible. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my point of order.
Point of order is withdrawn. Is the gentleman yield back?
I yield back, yes, sir.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself in opposition to the amendment. In this country, we believe in second chances. When people turn their lives around, it benefits our country and our communities. On March of 2019, former President Trump declared the month of April Second Chance Month to draw attention to the enactment of the Prison Reform Bill, the First Step Act, which came through this committee, and to ensure that those who have had criminal indiscretions in the past have the opportunity to become contributing members of society, unquote, from President Trump. This legislation contains very stringent criminal bars that are derived from the bipartisan Senate DREAM Act and have been endorsed by Senator Lindsey Graham. An applicant is disqualified if she or he has a felony conviction, has a misdemeanor conviction involving moral turpitude with a sentence of more than 6 months, has any 2 misdemeanors involving moral turpitude regardless of sentence, has more than 2 misdemeanors of any kind other than an immigration status-related offense that result in the applicant being imprisoned for an aggregate of 90 days or more. But we also believe in redemption. That is why we give the Secretary the discretion to evaluate the nature and severity of expunged convictions and waive certain grounds of inadmissibility to those who merit a second chance. Amendments that seek to further restrict eligibility are nothing more than attempts to score political points in exchange for decreasing the economic impacts of this bill. This legislation is about giving our economy a $1.5 trillion boost and creating over 400,000 jobs. We should not reduce that impact by excluding people who have turned their lives around and will positively contribute to our economy. Let's not forget the words of former President Trump. America is a nation that believes in the power of redemption. America is a nation that believes in second chances, unquote. For these reasons, I urge rejection of this amendment, and I yield back. Who else seeks recognition? In that case, the question occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. The noes have it.
Request a recorded vote.
What was that?
Request a recorded vote.
Roll call is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee?
No.
Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Bass? Ms.
No.
Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Jeffries?
No.
Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal?
No.
Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Stimmings?
No.
Ms. Stimmings votes no. Mr. Correa?
No.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse?
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath?
No.
Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Jones votes no. Ms. Ross?
Ross votes no.
Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush?
Bush votes no.
Ms. Bush votes no. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Shabbat?
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomert?
Aye.
Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Isa?
Aye.
Mr. Isa votes aye. Mr. Buck?
Aye.
Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates?
Aye.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock?
Aye.
Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Stubbe?
Yes.
Mr. Stubbe votes yes. Mr. Tiffany?
Aye.
Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey?
Aye.
Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy?
Aye.
Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Fishbach?
Aye.
Ms. Fishbach votes aye. Ms. Sparts?
Bartz, yes.
Ms. Sparts votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald?
Aye.
Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz?
Yes.
Mr. Benz votes yes. Mr. Owens?
Aye.
Mr. Owens votes aye.
Is Mr. Liu recorded?
Mr. Liu is not recorded.
How am I recorded?
Mr. Liu,
I'm
you're
not recorded? Okay. I vote no.
Mr. Liu votes no.
Are there any other members who wish to be recorded who have not been recorded? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 19 ayes and 24 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. For what purpose does Mr. Johnson seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.